So, it's been a little while since I've podcasted. I've had so many things that I should have podcasted, and I'm still optimistic that I'll have some people to chat with on here. But for now, these are thoughts that I feel I need to get out myself, and I do it for myself because we live in a society today where you understand that you're showing as much of yourself as you want the world to see. But it's interesting because since I was fortunate enough to study history as a teacher, as an undergraduate, we understand that this is our time capsule. This is how we show who we were. It's different than looking at those pictures of grandma and grandpa or great grandma and grandpa in the black and whites and assumed who they were. You have a chance to show who you are. And so I think this is an opportunity to be as candid as possible. I'm currently working on my fourth book. I'm working on my third and fourth book at the same time. And this one is about ism, specifically classism. I have for some time said classism is the greatest ism and the most significant ism of all time. And it is constantly hidden under other isms to make those other isms seem than more relevant than the institution, the foundational premise of classism itself. There was a video I watched recently, and it was about a talk that current independent Senator Bernie Sanders gave in 2003. And it looks like it was either high school or a college, maybe a community college, where the audience looked mostly to be like a mixed minority thing. It looked like it was more white people than any other race, but it looked like it was a mixed crowd. And he had some points on there that I thought were pretty interesting because while he didn't necessarily address classism as the top level of basically the banes of our society, he uses other isms and accuses the Republican Party specifically of divisiveness in their messages and mantras to win elections. And he himself also uses classism within his own messages, which he actually does endorse classism in a sense where you find your place in classism and you find your way to benefit the most. So there's a couple of points, and then I'll add the sound of the video at the end. It's about 5 minutes. And I want to address first with classism, there's a belief that college is necessary to be in the middle class. He often uses the word middle class. He wants to use middle class as a way to make people feel better about where they are because you're not on the bottom and you're not on the top. You're in the middle. And in the middle, that makes people contented because they're not last, they're not first, and they can see everything that's going on around them. Hopefully, they can catch on the coattails of people who are advancing to the next level, but they also are in a big enough group where they can grab on the people if they feel like they're sliding to go down to a lower class. One of the things they use, and this is a constant American ideal, I'm unsure about the rest of the world, but based on the university systems and how college is viewed based on what I've seen in my lifetime, and he said there's a belief that college is necessary to be in the middle class. I personally believe college is a false premise because it's used as your savior. I went to college and I was also in the military, and so I did trade school while I was in the military. And I'll say this, college has its value. College is good for the culturalization and socialization for people to understand better what they may want to do. But college, the necessity behind college would be lessened if K through 12 education was revamped and improved to deal with specific issues of the day. And to actually have students come out more life prepared. It is my opinion. I've been a teacher in public and now private schools for about 10 years, and I see school is generally used to socialize students, but very few use it in a sense to use it to advance themselves while they're in practice. So while I'm not going to disparage college because my college was a great one, my military education was a great one, and my other training, OJT and etc., were great ones. And I say this: education is what's necessary to move yourself from a lower class to a middle class to an upper class. And I'll go further and say that education will make you classless. It'll be impossible for people to classify you as a person specifically because, or classify your value specifically because education is infinite. And if you are a person who shows you are educated or shows your education through your activities of endeavor to win money, you can eliminate college in essence. Because if you actually look in college, many college professors, one, are not trained teachers, but two, many college professors are not necessarily college educated. Now, I don't think the statistic is that high, but I think it's significant that there are a number of college professors who teach college students are not college educated at all. And I think that's a valuable thing to understand about college. Next point that he made was about minimum wage opponents. And I thought this was an interesting point for those against minimum wage. Now, for me, I understand the need for minimum wage specifically when it was enacted some probably 70 years ago in the United States. I understood the purpose of it. It was the minimum wage to make sure people could survive, but it was realistically many believe socially it was meant for, well, today many people believe it's for children, but when it was originally created, it was meant to keep people basically off of government programs where you could have a specific number where you classified this class of people or this amount of money you make makes you ineligible to receive subsidies or anything like that or assistance from the government. Minimum wage has gone beyond that because in a capitalistic society where we have a free market, businesses decide what they pay their workers based on the value that that worker produces for them. So if a worker can produce $10,000, you're clearly not going to pay them the $10,000. You're going to pay them what your what it costs you to employ them minus whatever profit you see as important to you. But it's interesting because when he talks about the people who are opposed to minimum wage, he says something along the lines that there are people who are who would eliminate minimum wage altogether. And I look at that, and it's interesting if you look at the dynamics of history and legislation in the U.S. government, specifically dealing with slavery, where you can say, okay, well, slavery is outlawed, but you can essentially employ slave labor if a person is jailed because you essentially lose your rights. And that's interesting because if you look at the companies or corporations or specific fields in economic society of who uses jail labor, because people who are in jail do work and they do earn a small amount of money, but they do earn money, and there are corporations that use that labor in the jail to specifically sell products at a profitable markup. So I think that is also a valuable note to take point of when we talk about minimum wage in societies. The next point he talked about was healthcare, and I thought it was interesting because there's a question of should everyone have healthcare? And my opinion is, well, if I want to stay healthy, it is to my interest that everyone around me is healthy. So I would want most, if not all, of the society that I interact with to have health care to keep them baseline healthy where they don't pass on any communicable diseases, which also goes into the debate about vaccines and etc. But I'd leave that for another time. But my question specifically is about healthcare and should it be a for-profit industry? And we think about, well, healthcare is meant to keep people alive. It's meant to take care of people. And we understand that when I said to keep people alive, that we look at our healthcare industry, and our healthcare industry specifically is really a sick care. You don't use it until you're not well. And so technically healthcare is a misnomer, one, but two, it actually is missing the boat, because if we're really thinking about healthcare, healthcare should include gym memberships, personal trainers, and things like that, and maybe supplements to help improve whatever deficiencies you have. But our healthcare is about when you're sick, you do what's necessary to get yourself healthy again. But then we never address what got us sick in the first place, truthfully. And so, should it be for profit in entity industry? It depends. If keeping people alive is for profit, then that's your opinion. The most of the profit, based on what I've seen, and I could be mistaken, is that the profit in the healthcare industry really is derived from the R&D portion. So the research and development for healthcare is really where the people make the money, and scientists and so forth need to be paid. You need to pay for the equipment and things like that. But you would think that it kind of falls under nonprofit because it goes for the public good, but because they recognize that the power of the paper, the money, is in the cure, then you charge a specific amount for the research and development, which is normally above and beyond what is necessary, and then you charge above and beyond for the actual product that is created from that, and that's where you get your double profit. And that's why healthcare industries like drug sale reps, hospitals, insurance agencies make a lot of money, because you're doing all that upcharge for research and development to help take care of people for infirmities they have. But again, we're still ignoring the issue of actual health care, taking care of your health while it's in good health, how to improve it so you can build up immunity and other things like that. So you have a less of a need to be in a hospital for surgeries, have a need for drugs, and etc. So I think that's an interesting point to address. The next one is the privatization of education. Now, I've often waffled back and forth on this, because there's times where I believe that if you made schools as individual entities a for-profit thing, or had a sort of mixed bag of nonprofit, for-profit, which I don't know how you would name that, but a mix of for-profit, nonprofit, that schools could potentially perform better. But again, it's valuable to know who's in charge of that and what their intention is. So, for instance, if education is privatized, what would the metric be for learning? Like, what do you want the kids to learn? Because if education is privatized, that means you have to pay for it. And if you have to pay for it, or the government subsidizes or whatever, how does the person who's investing their money in that school get a return on that? Because school is meant to give you a return of education, and that education is supposed to turn you into a producing citizen. So what's the metric for learning? I mean, we use SAT tests and grades and stuff like that, but those are not true metrics for learning, because they just give you a mark to make you feel good, but does it show what you produce? As far as into the world, or what good that has for society, because me getting an A, did that help society improve? It could, because it can improve my sort of morale, mentality, but directly it doesn't. So we're looking at an industry that you have, basically, it's like a certificate of deposit, or a bond, where I'm investing for anywhere from 12 to 16 years into something, and I'm hoping that 60, 80, $100,000 that I've put into that turns into a person who produces $300,000, which really, it may happen, it may not. But the goal is, when that person is done, we don't want them to need the government to pay for anything. So that's where privatization of education, where I'm asking, well, what is the metric for learning? And if it is privatized, what's the profit motive play? Like, what role does the profit motive play inside of the privatized school? Because, I mean, you have to fund things. You have to pay for books, even though books are generally obsolete. And if you're not paying for books, you're paying for software, you're paying for hardware to have those educational resources on. Then you're paying for the basic things like electricity, water, maintenance of the building, and of the things within the building. And then you have to pay for the staff, and any extracurricular things that benefit the general morale of the student body and the people who work there. So the privatization of education is interesting, because I can see where there is a benefit, but because we live in a society that's generally a for-profit motive, it's a free market. it's about capitalism. The goal is survival of the fittest, truthfully. And if you're doing education, survival of the fittest doesn't necessarily match, because you want the point of education is so everyone becomes baseline fit. And if you have survival of the fittest, you can't have people fail in education. They're contrary ideas. The next point that I saw, based on a couple of points you brought up, was Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, etc. The only point I want to make out specifically is about Social Security, and I have a question. There's a specific tax on paychecks that I remember for Social Security. So as individual citizens, when you become a worker, you there's a portion of your paycheck that comes out directly for your Social Security, and then they send you statements, probably annually, quarterly. I'm not really sure, but I know they send you statements about how much money you've put into the system. And so my question is that how have we allowed, or how is it seen, that Social Security is an entitlement when it's something you pay for? Essentially, you're giving them money, and then they hold that money, and then they pay it back to you when you reach a certain age. And it's interesting because we know how that works. Basically, the government is working like a bank, right? The government takes your deposit, and then they use your deposit money that you're not going to use for some 50 year, if depending, 30, anywhere between 20 and 40 years, you're not going to use that money. So they're betting that 20 to 40 years they can make enough money to pay for other things, while they hold your money and say, hey, we'll give you a small interest rate on that, and then pay you out for the rest of your life. So the 20 to 40 years you put in will pay you for the next 20 to 40 years, because there's an assumption that you were going to die. So if you retire at 65, they don't expect you to live past 85. They said, hey, you gave us 20 years worth of money. We'll give you 20 years worth of money after you retire at 65. So they expect you to make it to 85, and then your money will run out and you're dead. And so we don't have to pay you anymore. But the issue that has come is that many times it feels like, one, there, whoever's doing the accounting hasn't adjusted for inflation. Second part is that what they're doing is they've seen that money. They have that money from 300 million people now, and they're like, oh, well, we have this money. Let's go do this thing and this thing and this thing. And we think investing in those things will produce a great return, so then we can just put that money right back. And it's the equivalent of basically working in the red, because we think that's how it works. Well, the government is a nonprofit entity, and they're trying to function like a for-profit while failing, because they have people who run the government and do budgets and pass laws that don't necessarily understand finance and funding. So they take gambles with your money because it's not their money. In addition to that money, there's obviously other taxes that pays them. So they feel no risk on it, because it's not their money. It's the equivalent of when banks go under. And that's where, if you look at after the Great Depression, when they created the FDIC to do that. But the federal government doesn't have an FDIC for your Social Security, which is something that you probably should think about, which is important, because if there's the narrative now that is becoming very normalized, which you should be bothered by or concerned with. That, I would say, not concerned with, but it should raise a flag for you, is that there's people roughly my age in their 30s that are expecting and accepting that when they reach retirement age in 30, 35 years, that their Social Security won't be there. So they have come to accept the narrative that the money that is being taken from them for the last 10 years or so, and the money that will be continue to be taken from them for the next 20 years, will not be there. So they've accepted that the government is taking their money and will never give it back to them. And that's amazing as a proposition, to understand that you are accepting that Social Security, or this program that they promise your retirement, will not be there for you when it's your turn. But you've given them the money. That should indict every person in the government, because at that point you have to really look and say, what are these people doing in the government? Who are these people? And why are they continually being reelected? I won't talk about term limits. That's my thing right there. I've taken a long time on that. I'm going to move to the next point, where he talked about tax breaks for the rich and corporations. And I think this is interesting, because this is a trickle-down economics thing. where if people believe if you give rich people more money, they have more money to put in the public. Not that they're incentivized, because they're not incentivized to do anything but make more money. And so the only reason they invest in anything below them on sort of monetarily is they see a return in it. And so trickle down economics in general only works if those people at the top who are trickling down that money feel there is a monetary benefit from it. So if I give you $5, I can see the drive hustling you. That $5 that I gave you, you'll turn that into $20. Then they're totally with that because they know every time they give them money, there's a return. But see, the reason trickle down economics fails is because people who are rich have little faith in the people below them for two reasons. One, that people who tend to have less money than them are willing to accept anything for survival. So that's where the minimum wage point comes back again. I can pay you garbage wages because you're going to do whatever's necessary. You work 3, 4 jobs to do what's necessary instead of demanding from me that I pay you what you're worth. And point number two, unless you have something I want, I have no reason to spend my money on it. And rich people really do that. We always look at, and well, not we, but there's this narrative out there that we look at people who are richer than us, and we try to learn from them. The greatest thing we learn from them is that they tend to not spend money or on things that are not of value to them, or they don't spend their own money. If they do buy things that are things that they may not necessarily need, which I think is a cool point. But it's interesting because this tax breaks for rich and corporations is interesting for this reason. There's a narrative also that people often say taxation is theft. And if taxes are eliminated or reduced, so you give a tax break or whatever for a corporation or rich people, the logic that makes the most sense is if I'm going to reduce a tax, then I have to eliminate or change or alter the service that tax provided. So if I'm going to lower my taxes on a corporation from 5% to 4.8%, I have to account for that 0.2% as lost revenue that went into a program. So where does that 0.2 of a revenue come from? What program are we eliminating when we reduce your taxes? Because we have to go net zero on these things. And the thing is that the government does, and this is where we have this current deficit we're talking about right now, budget deficit, is we reduce the taxes, but then we don't reduce any programs. And when we don't reduce any programs, again, since the lawmakers don't have any true stake in the game, they don't care. So if I reduce your taxes, but then I don't change my spending on the other side, then if I wasn't in the red, I now go in the red. And I may go in the red even more because the thing about it is that we've had the reduction of revenue, and those corporations and entities, they keep that money because they don't know if the government's going to take money from them again, or they find a way to hide that money or move that money into a way where it stays within the company. So when you give me a tax break as a corporation or a rich person, I'm going to find a way to move that money before you get a chance to realize, one, what you did was dumb, because you didn't. I saw you give me a tax break and I saw you didn't cut a program, so that means that you're going to ask me for that money back later. And so since I don't want you to ask me for that money back later, or if you do ask me, I want to say I don't have it, I'm going to put that money somewhere else so you can never get it from me again, and hence me staying in the black and me being profitable. But again, the government is run by people who don't necessarily understand these things, and it's sort of the classic classism of the rich stay rich, and the poor maybe don't stay poor, but they will stay there for a while. So from that, he's specifically at the 1 minute and 57 second video, he talks about how Republicans do this, and I dare say, because we have a two-party system, it's more than Republicans. It is Republicans, Democrats, and the two-party system in itself is the essential way classism in the United States works right now. So he says that they divide people up by races. So they use affirmative action as a way to divide people by races and say, oh, that black person took my job. What's interesting about affirmative action, the statistics have shown that the benefits of affirmative action in the United States actually benefit white women than any other group of people as we look at specific group breakdown. So again, while we try to throw it, oh, well, it's about the black people or the Hispanic people taking my job, white women benefit the most. So that means that those black those white men who say, "Oh, they're taking my job." You then have white women who are normally their spouses benefiting from that. So it's a false narrative in the sense of, one, they're benefiting from it if we're just going to talk about race. But the second part is that it also talks about an underlying thing about sexism, because when a man says that, "Oh well, XYZ is taking my job," while the women, the white women, the women of their race are benefiting, what they're looking at also is that they don't feel like those women should be making the money. They're the breadwinners. They're supposed to have the money. And it makes them sort of feel in a place of inferiority, because for some men, they feel inferior when their women make money. I ain't one of them, but that's what they feel. The next thing they do is about working class. So you have white collar and blue collar, where we look at people who have white collar jobs as better people, more important people in society because they work in the office and they dress up, whereas blue collar people, they do grunt work and things like that. But I think the interesting part about that is that the foundation of America comes from blue collar, but now we look at blue collar as lower than the standard one, because blue collar is not college educated, and again, that's that false premise. Generally, blue collar is not college educated, so there's a false premise of what college is supposed to do. And it's interesting because I have a friend who once said to me, and they're a blue collar worker, quote unquote, and I'm basically a white collar worker. I went to university, working a school, et cetera, et cetera. And they said to me, "Man, you live the life that I want, and this guy makes double what I make." And I look at that and I'm like, that's so crazy that you make double what I make, but then I'm living your dream. And I just thought it was funny because there's a devaluation of blue collar. Yes, because it tends to be more physical, but the return seems pretty good. So we have to understand that. And then especially since there's this narrative in America about bringing the manufacturing back. The blue collar work is what sustains society, and people don't understand that. And if they do understand it, they devalue it. The next point, which I kind of brought up in the race point, is gender. So women versus men, and they say, well, Republicans divide men and women, and it's so interesting because the issue that comes up obviously is just women's rights over their bodies and conservatism, which essentially is, let's do stuff like it was in the past. But if we do stuff like it was in the past, we never advance to where we are today, in the future, and going forward. So I think it's very interesting to look at those points and say, oh, well, do you divide people up by race, by working class, and by gender? You do, and that's about classism in itself. And they create subsets. So if we can't divide you up by this one thing, we're going to divide you up by this one thing. We will find a way for you to be an opponent with somebody that you have more in common with than you have differences with. And so there were some questions that I saw as he talked about it. Like one question, should everyone have health care? I think that's a valid question. I'd say yes, but I'm sure there are people who have a yes with an asterisk caveat to it. And then he asked the question, should funding for education be higher or lower? He gave them an and or, which is sort of a false premise again, because the question should really be, should funding for education be improved? And is the funding for education being used properly? Those questions are better questions, because then you look at the system in itself. And I asked that question, do only Republicans do this? And it's false, because Democrats do it too. It's because we have a two-party system, which I think does none of us a favor. Another point that he brought up in there was about abortion, pro-abortion and anti-abortion, which is interesting because abortion is more than just what it is on the surface. The verbiage, pro-life versus pro-choice. And that's more specific because, okay, you have pro-life, people who are against abortion, against killing a baby for any means necessary. We don't care what happened, do not kill the baby. And I understand people doing that, because if you say that, you're saying you value life, so we don't want to take life away if there's a way to maintain it. But then you have the pro-choice. Well, the pro-choice is about the circumstances that come about that created that life. Was the woman raped? Will that woman die to have that baby. So now you have to choose a life. And because women are the ones who carry the baby, it it realistically should be, in my opinion, on them on what they should do. If we have a choice to choose what we can do, what medical treatments we can do on our body, for example, like having DNRs if you're about to die, or assisted suicide and things like that. If we have the option to choose for those things, why are women subjected to a different set of standards of can they choose what they do to their body? Now, yes, there are some women that may use abortion as birth control, but that's also because birth control and other women's products that benefit women, sort of on women's health specifically, are either expensive or inaccessible to them, and that all goes all the way back to should everyone have health care sort of thing. The next point that he had was guns. So you're pro-gun or anti-gun, and again, it's we dumb down arguments because with guns, it's about who has access to guns and what guns are accessible. And those are the greater arguments, because I understand and I accept having a gun for protection in your home. I understand and accept having guns for hunting, even though people may disagree with that. But at some point, hunting has always been a part of our society because we're omnivores, and so we eat meat. But you can ask the question, well, why are you hunting if there's places that their businesses to have meat for you? So while I'm neither pro nor anti, I understand what's being said is about who has access to guns and what types of guns are accessible. Not restricting people, but being aware that guns essentially were created as weapons of war, and then we turned them into other things, and we turned it into sport, we turned it into protection. And protection is about war in itself, so we have to still be aware of that. The other point he brought up was the division of people by religion, and this in a country that specifically points out that they don't endorse religion in its foundational documents. The fact that most people accept that subliminally that America is a Christian nation and they're functioned by Christian ideals. The religion point is one that is just curious in itself, because when it's a big deal if a Jewish person becomes a president or an elected official, or if a Muslim person becomes an elected official, when those things are the headlines above the quality of the person, the ideas of the person, the quality of the character of the person, it says something in essence about the system of governance and how we view people in society. There was a division about gay and straight people. And again, do we really care about what people do in their private lives? And if we do care about that, I mean, what happened to the right to privacy? And why do you care what someone else does in their private time unless it's illegal, right? And then you have pro-war and anti-war, and where you're seeing, well, people who are anti-war are seen as unpatriotic, or you're soft because you like, hey, let's find a different way to find a solution instead of shooting this person in the face. And I mean, and we believe that that's a show of strength. If we can beat someone up, they'll be afraid of us. But the thing is, that fear generally generates a strength and energy from ourselves and from our opponents that is unchartable. And because it's unchartable, why you may believe you can win a war because you're bigger, stronger, faster, or you have more resources, that person whose fear level is higher than yours can cause you a significant problem regardless of how many resources you have. And we can harken back to the American Revolution, where the smaller team won. It can go back to the Vietnam War, where the smaller team surprised the bigger team. So we have to understand that while we go pro and anti-war, we have to understand the dynamic of who we're fighting with, why we're fighting with them, and what level of fear do they have when they're fighting. He made a narrative also about how, in general, what the narrative tends to sound like when it's publicized in the media is white workers versus everyone else, which I actually see and I can kind of agree with. And it's essentially where there's a lot of white people who are called to the carpet and they have to apologize for their whole race. for some things, which I think is absolutely insane. Whereas it does happen on the other side where specific ethnicities are given the attributes of the outliers of their society. So all Mexicans are rapists, Latino people are XYZ, black people are lazy, black people are criminal, black people are violent. And, the outliers in that ethnicity or race have to live with those attributes of the people who are the sort of the lower dregs of their race or ethnicity. And I think it's interesting because a friend of mine told me that the white male is the most discriminated demographic in the United States. And while I can see the perspective on that based on the narrative that's in public, it also is interesting because while if you say they're the most discriminated demographic in the United States, you also have to understand they're the most powerful demographic in the United States. So when you wear the crown, most everyone comes at you and you make the rules. So people are going to come at you about the rules. So while if you're in power, there will be a movement at some point against you. And so if you want to wear the crown, you have to understand that there are going to be people who come for you. Why? Because we've created a society of versus, this versus that. And we've created a society that specifically has classism. If we look at classism in the United States, the white male is on the top tier. And that's why I would believe if a white male in general sees a black male or a woman or Hispanic or any other ethnicity other than their specific ethnicity rise above them, they call into question why is this person above me? Not because they believe the person is inferior, but because society is set up. Society has shown them that they are supposed to be on top. So then if they don't feel like they've done anything wrong, those people have to have done something wrong in order to circumvent them or pass them or supplant them, specifically because the rules of the game don't work like that. I'm not supposed to be below them. And so my basic ending point, because I thought this was a very interesting video, my basic ending point of it is basically he constantly, while he says Republicans do this, he advocates regularly for classism in itself. He supports the system. He's like, hey, this is how you fit in the system. And I think we have to understand that there's a greater level that we all can achieve if we understand past this point of you can be more than classism. And you are in a class by yourself if there is classism. Be unique and individual to yourself. And you can move to a level beyond that of whatever class people have tried to put you in. If you're pro this or anti that, or your race does this, or the collar of your shirt or the color of it does that, or how you feel about reproductive rights or guns or all those things. So understand that when I write this book about classism, I think it'll be something where I'm lending my voice to help people understand that you're beyond that, and that not only are you beyond that, you can do something about it in your lifetime. So I appreciate the time. I'm going to play this Bernie Sanders thing so you can hear what I'm talking about. And I got this video from Now Politics. It was from Bernie Sanders in 2003. And I would say now he's a little more to the left based on what I've seen recently from him. So enjoy.
Question is, how does the Republican Party do so good? And now I'm going to tell you something that very few people in Congress would tell you. If you are the Republican leadership, and this is what your goals are to give huge tax breaks to the very richest people in this country. Your goals are ultimately to privatize Social Security so that Wall Street can make money from that. Privatize Medicare so the insurance companies can make more money. Privatize education. Do away with public schools. If those are your goals and you said that to the American people, you think you get a lot of lower. There are many members of the Congress today, Republicans, who not only will not raise the minimum wage, which is $5.15 an hour, you know what they will tell you, honestly? They believe in abolishing the minimum wage. Did you know that? Check it out. Telling you the truth. So that if Americans can work for $3 an hour or $2 an hour, not a problem. Now, if you had an agenda like that and you went before the American people, tax breaks for the rich, destruction of Medicare, destruction of Social Security as we know it, lowering the minimum wage or abolishing it, how many votes do you think you'd get?
La nueva maxilata de Nestógeno 3 Kits con mayor contenido
Forgive the
te ofrece un
commercial,
súper ahorro para que la
but it'll be
barriguita de
back
tu
in
hijo
3
esté feliz.
seconds. Also,
Nestógeno
forgive the
3 Kits,
background
felicidad
noise.
que se nota.
It is what it is.
You'd get not a whole lot. Maybe the richest 1% would vote for you. But that's not a lot of votes. So what do? I've got a problem. You package it. How do you package it? And here I want you to pay attention to me. Because this is bad stuff. I don't mind debating people who say, I was on a Hannity show, Sean Hannity yesterday, and Hannity, extreme right-wing guy, he loves these tax breaks for the rich and so forth, so we had a little bit of a discussion about that. Actually, it was a loud discussion. But I don't mind people who are upfront about that. Okay, give the rich more tax breaks, but that doesn't win you elections. So this is what you do. What you do is divide people up. When you asked me your question, how do I get elected? I said, I try to bring people together. We fight for women's rights. We support the rights of minorities. We support the rights of workers. We bring the majority of people together. And occasionally, honest people will have differences of opinion. In this room, there will be differences of opinion. But everybody in this room is in agreement that everybody should have health care, right? Question number 2, should we increase funding for education or should we lower funding for education? Raise your hand if you think we should increase funding for education. Okay, you're on the side of the vast majority of Americans. Okay. So on those issues, we bring people together. Now, what do the Republicans try to do? And they use it in what we call, kind of language that they're not upfront about. What do? We divide people up by races. Affirmative action becomes one issue. All them black people getting the jobs that we white people used to have. Split people, working class, white against black. Instead of working together to create decent jobs for all. Those uppity women now, they want the right to choose. We'll split people on the abortion issue. We'll split people up on the gun issue. We'll split people up on religious issues. Do you follow what I'm saying? So you split people up, and then they end up, if you're a middle-class person, voting against your own interests, and the rich go laughing all the way to the bank. Okay? And they very often play white workers off against everybody else. And we try to bring people together to say, look, we're all in this boat together, whether you're black or white, whether you're Hispanic, whether you're Muslim, whatever you may be. Everybody needs health care. How do we create a health care system that works for all people? Not divide people up. Everybody knows that the kids, young people, do not make it into the middle class unless they have a decent college education. So how do we make college education accessible to all people? Not an expensive proposition, a tiny, tiny fraction of the president's tax breaks for the rich, if we put into financial aid, would make sure that every young person in this country could go to college without going deeply into debt. You know what? The vast majority of the people support us. But in order to do that, we've got to bring everybody together. And many of these, not all, and I'm not here to disparage all Republicans. Some very decent people happen to be conservative. I respect that. But some people who I don't respect will play off women against men, black against white. Oh, the gay issue, very, very big issue. Okay? Straight against gay, right? We're all supposed to hate gay people, so we split that group up. And then the argument, some of us are not patriotic. We had concerns about the war in Iraq. I voted against giving the president authority to the war in Iraq. Well, that makes us unpatriotic. We hate America. Divide those things up. And that's how they succeed. And they succeed with the help of the media. Because the media will not talk about how, in a sense, the common problems that Americans face and how we bring people together. And that's what I believe. I believe that on issues like everybody in this room thinks, I think, that instead of giving tax breaks to the rich, we should increase federal aid to education. Anyone disagree with that? Well, you know what? Most Americans agree with that. All of you think that every American should be entitled to health care. I suspect most of you think we should not have a trade policy which allows corporations to throw American workers out on the street and run to China. Most Americans agree with that. And our job is to bring people together on common interest. And some of these extreme right-wing people, you watch the issues that they talk about. Affirmative action they use to divide. The issue of abortion they use to divide. The issue of guns they use to divide. And our job is to say, let's focus on basic economic issues. How do we expand the middle class? This is a great country. Why is it the average American is working longer hours for low wages than 30 years ago? Let's talk about that. Okay? Okay, that was a long answer to a good question. I apologize for going on too long.
So, and the end of all of that, with this 45 or so minutes with the choppy video and a rudimentary system of podcasting, the last point I think worthy of noting is the point about the media. One day we'll realize that when the media changed from a loss leader for news or for TV networks and other entertainment entities, NBC, CBS, etc., when it changed, when CNN was created and news became a for-profit entity, what happened is that the middle of the road, the unbiased journalism disappeared because they saw there was money to be made in news and reporting the bad things and sensationalizing the negative and making sure that their people scandalized. That's what leads their ratings, because at that point they have to make money to stay alive, and so they have to make you watch, and they have to make you watch, and the only way they can make money off their ad revenue is to make people watch. So understand that if the news media could ever go back to a nonprofit enterprise, that's where you'll get the truest, realest news. But it may be unlikely. I think one of the safest, surest places that can challenge news media, the for-profit news media, is social media. Social media is it's nonprofit. People post information on there all the time for free, and so now it's about the responsibility of the individuals who participate in social media of having their own journalistic integrity, where they report the truest things with with facts and references and supports to what they're reporting. I laugh because it's generally unlikely, but social media can actually combat the for-profit media surface. So I leave you with that. I actually enjoyed that. That was very therapeutic for me. And it leads me into writing my book about classism, or isms specifically. Classism is the greatest ism of them all. Have a fantastic day. And if you have a challenge to what I say, or if you are supporting what I say, hey, comment, man. Hit me up so we can do a podcast together. I love contrasting thoughts, not because I like arguing, but because I like to hear the other side, because I know that I'm 90% right and there's a 10% that you have that can correct me and make me 100% right. So let's go from there. Until next time.